Hey, Sharita, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Somebody,
Yes.
okay, it just came through. Okay, that's great.
All right.
I know of two people who told me, well, two people I know won't be here, and that's Russ and Angel. Did you get any kind of notifications from anyone else, Ruby? Ruby, can you hear me?
Can't speak for Ruby, Sharita, but your audio is fine.
Okay. I'm trying to see if we have a forum. I'm at home today, and I'm having home PC issues that I didn't plan on having because I was on Zoom on Friday at home. So I'm not sure what's going on. Give me a few seconds, and we're not at quorum yet. We do have a lot of things to tackle, and I also cannot send you guys the agenda. I'm going to try to type it in the chat really quickly. Okay, are we at quorum? Let's see. 1, 2, 3. 4, 5, 6, 7. Sure, yep. We are at quorum. I don't think that Russ got us the minutes before he went out on break. Did he? Thinking we were gonna have to review them in next month's meeting. I want to say that was the communication I got from him. He didn't think he was gonna get it to us in time. I have inserted the items that we need to discuss today in the chat box to everyone. We will go ahead and move forward. So the first item on our agenda is the dedicated plus housing prioritization. We need to discuss this further and vote on whether this is a recommendation we will make to the full HSAC or not. I will entertain discussion at this time. Anybody have any thoughts about it? Does everybody remember what dedicated plus is?
Hi, Sharita. I'm sorry. Can we have a review? I'm sorry.
Because I'm not at my office today, I do not have my items here in front of me with about the dedicated plus. But I want to say it relates to how we would utilize our permanent supportive housing inventory. From remembering correctly, I'm gonna put Hanalea on the spot really quickly and ask her to give us a really, really short snippet. Can you do that for me, Hanalea?
Yes, and I just shared the HUD page explaining what dedicated plus is to the group as well. Yeah, so basically, currently all of our PSH, our COC funded PSH projects are what's called like 100% chronic dedicated, which is that really strict definition of chronically homeless. What dedicated plus allows us to do is it allows us to have a little bit more flexibility in meeting the criteria for permanent supportive housing. So the important ones for Durham are that if we house a person when they're chronic and then they become destabilized, we don't have to reestablish chronicity to house them again. We can use that old chronicity to house them. So that's a big one for us. That does come up a few times a year usually. And then as well as, here, I can move this down a little bit so you can see all the definitions. Here.
Is it the transitional housing one? Number 4?
That doesn't come up super often for us, but that is worth mentioning. So if someone's was chronic when they entered transitional housing, they maintain that chronicity. Oh, here we go. It's number 5. It's the fact that we don't have to count up 4 separate occasions to get to their 12 months. That just gives us a little bit more flexibility in establishing the 12 months in the 3 years. So essentially it doesn't make things a whole lot more flexible, but just a tad more flexible so that we can focus a little bit more on who's most vulnerable and a little less on who just meets that like letter of the law definition of chronicity.
Ebony, just so you know, I think after the last after our last meeting last month, I sent out, and I think either Colin or Hanalea sent this same information out if you want to do some further research on it. I would just add, Hanalea, that I didn't realize number 5 was I didn't realize that Dedicated Plus had this number 5 in there, because I thought if the person had 12 months and it was less than 4 episodes, you could still count it.
Not currently, but if we went to Dedicated Plus, you could, yeah.
This is also currently on the table for housing bonus projects, or anything that would be a new project to our community, and not for our renewal projects until we make a community-wide decision, if or when we make a community-wide decision to adopt Dedicated Plus as the letter of the law for our PSH programs.
That's right. We are hoping that our renewal projects switch to Dedicated Plus, but we currently can't force them to do that. So the thing that we can do is choose to prioritize those projects for new projects and expansion projects that have this definition, while also encouraging our renewals to do this as well.
Do folks feel comfortable going forward with a vote as to whether we will support or not us switching to Dedicated Plus prioritization?
I think one other thing I'd like to say for a recap for folks, in case they're wondering about some of our, or don't quite remember all of the conversation last month, I was pretty vocally in support of this, as I think it eliminates some barriers for some people who are sometimes a little bit tricky to serve. I believe that there was also a conversation about were there going to be unintended consequences about not being able to serve some additional people that I think Sharita brought up. So just kind of throwing those two things out there, we had also talked about wanting some more time to review this as part of the reason why we didn't vote the last time. Just recapping what I can from the minutes from memory.
But it's important for us to make a decision and a recommendation, because we're getting ready to come up on our application process. We're just waiting for that release. So we need to be prepared for that as to whether we're going to be a Dedicated Plus community or not. So this is definitely an item that we need to vote on today. Is that correct, Hanalea?
That's correct.
Motion to support Dedicated Plus in our community. I'm not sure if that's the right wording we need for this, but I'll make a motion.
And I can just clarify what the motion is, Helen, to make sure. So the motion, I believe, is to set a priority for bonus projects in our next COC competition that follow this Dedicated Plus definition.
Got that?
Do we have someone who's taking minutes today?
That normally for Russ.
Yeah.
The meeting is being recorded, so I'm assuming it can be sent to us for minutes. Is that right, Ruby?
And Zoom recordings do create a transcript.
That's true.
In that case, I second that motion. We cannot, Ruby.
Ruby, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, it's recording. Russ asked to pick it up later, so.
So Russ said he would do it. He would just do it late.
The minutes?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay. So that's great to know.
Unless you want to assign somebody else to do them.
Well, no one else was forthcoming or eager to assist. So what I said was, if push comes to push, then I will get with you so it can be transcribed when I'm in my office. Okay. Okay, so I have a motion and a second. So the motion was by Helen Tripp. It was seconded by Malcolm. Is that correct? That was you, Malcolm, right?
Yep.
All those in favor, please put yes in the chat box.
Does it need to be out loud so there's a transcription?
Okay, yes, so say yes and your yes, no, or abstain and your name.
Ebony Thomas, yes.
Helen Tripp, yes.
Heidi Carter, yes.
Sharita McCullers, yes.
Malcolm White,
Colleen.
yes.
Colleen Herbert, yes.
I think I saw Valerie on. Is she? Yeah. Valerie, are you voting?
Valerie, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We need to have 7 in order to pass it, right?
Well, as long as Valerie's present in the meeting, she doesn't, you know.
So I can just
whether
count
or
her
not
as no?
it doesn't affect quorum. I would mark her as an abstention.
I got you. The motion passes. The next item on our agenda will be Hanalea's presentation. We will about the VI and racial disparities. Hanalea, you have 15 minutes and then we have 30 minutes of discussion. You may begin.
Thanks, Sharita. All right. Good morning, everyone. I guess I should have said that before, but good morning. I wanted to share with y'all some evaluation work that that has been being conducted with the coordinated entry subcommittee, and talk to y'all about some potential recommendations as a short-term triage solution to some racial equity issues we have in our process, while the coordinated entry subcommittee works on a permanent solution. So let me make this bigger. So currently, for those who are not familiar, we use an assessment called the VI-SPDAT to prioritize people for housing in Durham. This is a tool that's been used for a number of years around the country, but more recently, a number of COCs have conducted analyses of the effect of using the VI-SPDAT on racial equity in their communities and have found significant inequities in the VI-SPDAT results. I conducted a preliminary analysis, and I want to emphasize that word preliminary because the tools that I have at my disposal right now are very limited. I cannot do as sophisticated as an analysis as I would like to do at the moment, but even this preliminary analysis has shown some very, very disturbing findings around how the use of the VI-SPDAT is affecting our housing allocation. And the coordinated entry subcommittee has already decided they want to replace the VI-SPDAT with another strategy. We currently are circulating a survey in the community to get feedback on our priorities as a community. But in the meantime, we continue to use this tool. And given the findings about racial disparities as a result of the tool, my recommendation is that we do triage a short-term solution because once we found this, I just don't think we can sit on it. So regarding the specific findings of the preliminary analysis, the first thing that I did was I looked at the percent of clients that are, a percent of our chronically homeless clients that are Black or African-American compared to the percent of clients with a VI-SPDAT over 10 that are Black and African-American. And the reason that I did this is currently the way that we prioritize for looking at for permanent supportive housing versus rapid rehousing is we look at those who are over 10 for permanent supportive housing and those who are below 10 for rapid rehousing. So looking at this, 67% of chronically homeless clients in our COC are Black or African American, but only 32% of the clients that are chronic and have a VI SPDAT over 10 are Black and African American. So that initial data point tells us that there may be somewhere in the range of a 30 to 35% disparity in allocation of permanent supportive housing to Black and African American clients. For me, the next natural question that this raises is this happening because Black and African American clients are just less vulnerable than white clients, or is it because of the inequities in the results of the tool? So again, with the limited tools at my disposal, what I did was I used the percent of clients with 3 or more disabilities as a proxy for vulnerability. So we know that clients with multiple disabilities tend to be very, very vulnerable. So looking at this, if clients that were Black and African American were a lot less vulnerable than the rest of the population, we would expect to see a much lower percent of those with 3 or more disabilities. And we don't see that. So 16% of all chronically homeless clients have 3 or more disabilities, and 13% of Black or African American clients have 3 or more disabilities. And I should say of Black and African American clients that are chronically homeless have 3 or more disabilities. So what we see here, maybe 3%, it could be meaningless, right? It could be just a small blip from a point in time. It could be that very, very slightly less vulnerable, but overall, we're not seeing huge gaps in that to explain that 30 to 35% dip in those with the VI SPDAT over 10. I also looked at the percent of chronically homeless clients with the VI SPDAT over 10 with 3 or more disabilities. This was done as a check to see whether or not this really is a good proxy for vulnerability. And indeed, we find that while 16% of all chronically homeless clients have 3 or more disabilities, 48% of those with a VI SPDAT over 10 have 3 or more disabilities. So this is telling us that there is this good correlation between having 3 or more disabilities and being very, very vulnerable. The next thing that I did was I looked at the average VI SPDAT score of chronically homeless clients broken out by race. So the average VI SPDAT score is 9.2 for chronically homeless clients across our system. For Black or African American clients, that's 8.77, which is a drop of about one point. For white clients, it's about 10.13, which is an increase of about 1 point. So we see this about 1 point disparity between white and Black and African American clients in our system. However, there's a really interesting intersection here between clients with 3 or more disabilities and the disparity growing. So when we break out chronically homeless clients with 3 or more disabilities, that disparity grows to 3 points. So all chronically homeless clients with 3 or more disabilities on average have an 11, about an 11 point VI SPDAT, but Black or African American clients have about a 9.7 VI SPDAT if they have 3 or more disabilities. And then white clients, you see this huge jump to 13 on average. So there's about a 1 point disparity for the average chronically homeless client, but when you are in this very vulnerable group, this 3 or more disabilities group that definitely should be being looked at for PSH, that disparity grows to 3 points. And that 3 points is definitely enough to be the difference between getting permanent supportive housing and not getting permanent supportive housing. What I believe is happening here is that the more vulnerable a client is, the more barriers they have to overcoming the racial disparities in the VI SPDAT itself, because it requires the self-reporting and almost, as you can think about it, like self-advocacy, really being able to communicate your vulnerabilities in this tool. And so the more disabilities you have, the more barriers you have, it seems like what's going on is that that's sort of combining with the natural racial inequities in the tool to create this much larger disparity in results. So here are my preliminary conclusions from the analysis. Using the VI-SPDAT score to decide prioritization for PSH or a step down to rapid rehousing may be causing a 32 to 35% disparity in access of Black or African American clients to permanent supportive housing in our system. VI-SPDAT scores of Black or African American clients on average are 1.36 points lower than white clients. And I just want to make a note here. The reason I only looked at Black or African American clients here rather than other non-white clients is because the other non-white client groups is really too small to analyze, but I did just do a quick analysis to make sure there wasn't a huge disparity, and their scores were actually coming in higher than the white clients. So again, it was too small to find any like conclusions, but I do just want to mention that I did look at that quickly to make sure there weren't any massive issues that we should be aware of. And then for clients with 3 or more disabilities, this disparity grows to 3.33 points on average. I have made some recommendations. So again, it's very urgent that the COC find another way to prioritize or allocate these resources, and the coordinated entry subcommittee is in the process of working on that. However, I do recommend that we triage a solution in the meantime. My recommendation is that we consider using an adjusted VI-SPDAT between 1 and 3 points, 1 point for the average chronically homeless client, 1 point for the average client, 3 points for chronically homeless clients with 3 or more disabilities, for Black or African American clients until a permanent solution is found. I did rerun my analyses using this adjusted score, and doing this adjustment eliminates the disparity down to between 0 and 6%. Those are my findings. Those are my recommendations. You will need to vote if you want to adopt this temporary adjusted VI-SPDAT as a solution for us to be able to implement it. That does require a vote. Also very open to other triage solutions. Again, we're looking for things that can be quickly implemented to try to not allow this inequity at least to be perpetuated while we find a permanent solution. So open to questions or thoughts here.
Hey, so it's Sharita. I have a lot of stuff on this area. So as you guys all know, I work for the Healthcare for the Homeless Clinic. That's part of Lincoln Community Health Center. And I have been in national circles talking about the inequities in the VI-SPDAT for 5 or more years. So I wasn't surprised to see the numbers that Hanalea supplied to us today. And actually she sent it, I think, to the group previously, and I looked at her information, so I wasn't surprised. I have my apprehension about just, adding points to make it right, because I still think that we will miss tons of people in those numbers. I mean, we may definitely be able to serve those people that score high enough with their 8s that it would be significant enough to move them up to an 11 and get them over that 10 hump. But I think that there's still a lot of people that we will miss. I think it's something that definitely we can try. I have been in conversations with Mr. Patrick Gilvar, who is one of the leading consultants and researchers who's been doing a lot of work about racial disparities and the VI-SPDAT. He's also sitting on some national committees that are looking at the VI-SPDAT and alternative prioritization tools that are more equitable. I think I shared some information with you, Hanalea, and Colin on last week, because he and I had a 30-minute conversation on Friday. So I definitely have some apprehensions about just the points being the be-all, end-all solution, but I guess it's worth a try if we need to catch folks. What I will say about the research that you presented today is that I am very used to when racial disparity work starts to happen, that we just start counting numbers. We just start counting and kind of we stop there. And what I would have liked to see in the presentation, Hanalea, that you presented today was some numbers real numbers about how we're doing. What do our numbers look like as an end result? How disproportionately are we housing white people versus Black people between PSH and rapid rehousing projects, because I think that's where our challenges and our issues lie. What I will also say is that as far as, lots of people have, issues owning their vulnerabilities. I think that sometimes staff in our COC projects take information at face value. I don't think that they understand what disability means. A lot of them associate disability with a check. And there are tons of people in our continuum of care who are homeless, who have disabling conditions that impact their ability to live and take care of themselves and do the things they need to do for themselves, but it's not documented. And so, and the patient, because of stigma, is not comfortable with telling a stranger in the first 2 weeks of, staying in the shelter at night and being pushed out all day, to be comfortable enough to share that kind of information about themselves. And so it requires a very savvy person working with them to kind of understand some things, to go a little bit deeper and ask some more questions to get those real, true VI for that outcomes. So I think, it's also an issue of kind of personal willingness to get the VI for that right, and maybe looking at the questions in an unconventional way to actually try to gather the correct and accurate information. So that's what I want to add to that.
Yeah, if I can respond to those, Sharita, you have a lot of really good points here. The first point about analyzing permanent supportive housing placements. The reason that I did the analysis this way, instead of looking at the actual allocation, is because we redid our prioritization in September, or, well, I think technically y'all began, or not y'all, but they began redoing it in July with Cheney, but I don't know that it was really fully implemented until I came on in September. But either way, because PSH comes up so rarely, it's very hard to get enough numbers to really do an analysis at this point. However, I could do that analysis with the old prioritization as well, including that. We just need to be cognizant of the fact that we wouldn't be necessarily analyzing the way our new prioritization is working. So I certainly can do that evaluation and send that out, just with that caveat that I'm going to need to include years that would not be applicable for our current prioritization. It's much easier with rapid rehousing, right? Because you have a way bigger number. We could just analyze rapid rehousing since the new prioritization, but for PSH, it's harder because we have so few slots come up.
I would add that I think the value that kind of work would do, I think it would tell us a whole bunch of stories about the patients the clients who maybe started out with a lower VIs for that, and what had to happen to get them to a more accurate VIs for that. Because, we've had conversations before about how soon you can redo a VIs for that. I would just be curious to see that story laid out, how we came to a point, maybe we had a person with an 8 and we maybe were able to, after reevaluating things, get them to an 11 or 12, and what was missing. Who were the people who were involved in that process of getting, I think that kind of story has merit, and I think we can pull from that. But the other thing that I would say to that is that also may talk about what we do outside of just our VIs for that scores in Durham to help our clients, because we may not be missing the mark where it's necessarily this point of giving extra points. It may be some other things that's telling that story. So I think, sometimes our past efforts are important in informing our future decisions.
Yeah, and I think that this recommendation I'm making is on top of existing efforts to try to get the VI SPDAT right, which include, we do have a VI SPDAT exception process now, where if a client has either a mental health disability or some other cognitive condition, and the case manager believes that the client is unable to accurately self-report, they can submit a form explaining what they know about the client, that the client is not able to self-report. And so these analyses include clients who have gone through that that exception process. I think part of why that hasn't rectified the issue is, one is not everyone falls into that group. too is I think the case managers are still sort of trying to wrap their heads around that. People are using it more now, but just starting to pick it up, even though it's been around for a while. I've only had a handful of clients really go through it. And then 3 is kind of what you're explaining, Sharita, about the requirement for someone to really take that on board and know the client well enough. And then the other piece is I have been much more flexible about redoing the SPDATs. If a case manager, I just sort of basically say, if you learn new information, redo the VI-SPDAT. I'm pretty flexible on that these days. But again, these are the results with all of that flexibility built in. I certainly agree with you that this is not the end all be all. This is not something I would recommend as a permanent solution at all. I think if we were going to stick with the VI-SPDAT, really trying to do these trainings and try to redo the way people think about how to do the assessment would be the way to go. But I don't think it makes sense to invest a lot of time in doing that, since we are currently in the process of replacing the VI-SPDAT. So trying to find something that doesn't require a lot of time to rectify this in the meantime, while also we don't know, there's very little evidence that would rectify things. I don't know how to test that, so that would be an experiment in itself. But trying to find something that requires not that much, time and effort on the front end, since we are in the process of replacing the VI-SPDAT, we don't want to invest a lot more into the VI-SPDAT itself.
May I say something, please? So one point that I wanted to make sure, or like got highlighted, that I think everybody has seen, is that there was Hanalea sent out a prioritization survey encompassing of housing barriers that I might have zoned out for a minute when you were talking, Hanalea, but I just wanted to make sure that got mentioned, that that we asked people to identify particularly the housing barriers that could be augmented in addition to the VI-SPDAT, or used in addition to the VI-SPDAT for how we're considering people for that prioritization, because we don't quite know yet. And then one thing, and this is information that you could ask for from the performance from performance management. So I'll just share it voluntarily here. Sharita, you had a question about like, what are the outcomes of some of these things? So you all know that that Alliance, and me particularly as the administrator, but Alliance runs a permanent supportive housing program called DASH for this population of people, right? For chronically homeless individuals, disabled, more than a year of homelessness. We had for a long time through 2018 really not had any availabilities in our program. We hadn't moved people on. We that was actually at a time we didn't have a great understanding, as I was coming into sort of the administrator role of that project, on the budget, to tell you the truth. And so we got a handle on that and realized that we had some money to bring in, particularly for single households for this, for the chronic homeless prioritization. It would have been families too if we had them, but we mostly had single households. So that said, Dash has brought in some single households since about 2 years ago, since the summer of 2019. And also to say that along that process, the by name list has been the place where we have drawn those referrals. So I have not, I'm a pretty like by the book kind of person around this stuff. So I have not solicited them from other places. They've only been from the prioritization meetings, and including the way that we have adopted the new process that Hanalea referenced like a year ago. That being said, the DASH program has brought on 7 people in the last 2 years, all of whom are single households, into permanent housing. 5 of those people identify as white. Those have come only from this meeting. I have vocally said before, I've been concerned about that. And it just sort of brings up that it fits kind of into the category of what we're talking about. A number of those people, this is I think some of those people, you know who they are, right? We remember a gentleman who used to live on Fayetteville Street who clearly needed the project, but to the point that they had high VI-SPDAT scores, they also happen to be white. I think that we see a lot of the VI-SPDAT scores in the 13 and above range, really in the 15 range. I feel like I see often tend to be people who are white, and that just doesn't strike me. That I don't believe that those are just that those happen to be people who are more vulnerable. I don't buy that.
Yeah, and those numbers, I mean, that's anecdotal because it's one project, but I think it is interesting that those numbers really line up with this percentages, right? That 70% of those are chronic VIS, but over 10 are non-Black, right? And you're basically saying that's around what 5 out of that 7. That's a very similar kind of grouping. So it'll be interesting. I can look at whether overall those projects match those numbers, but it would make sense given what we've found.
So if I understand correctly, this is an item that we need to vote on, whether we want to use this 1 to 3 point adjusted system right now as a countermeasure to our equity issues as it relates to the VISPDAT.
That's correct. I'm requesting that y'all vote to implement this as a temporary measure under your authority. I mean, technically we could do it without a vote because we're allowed to pilot things without y'all, but I just didn't feel comfortable. This is such a huge decision. I didn't feel comfortable moving forward without policy and planning voting on this as a measure, but this would be under your delegated authority to make changes to the coordinated entry process.
It's my,
Go ahead.
Sharita.
Go ahead.
It's just my opinion that we, that if we make a vote on this, we should also set ourselves a date for revisiting.
I agree.
I don't know the time period of what that is, but set ourselves one.
I think,
And then
yeah,
my question,
timeline.
while you answer that, Hanalea, my question is, how would you, so you can answer both of these at the same time, how would you determine who gets 1 point, 2 point, 3 points? So if we move to do this, will you come back and tell us how you're going to delegate these or define these, who gets 1 point, who gets 2, who gets 3?
Yeah, so based on my preliminary analysis, my plan is to do a 1 point adjustment across the board. And then for chronically homeless clients that have 3 or more disabilities, to do a 3 point adjustment. I can do a second analysis to look at clients who have specifically 2 disabilities and see if that merits a 2 point adjustment. But currently, again, I'm working with very rudimentary tools, so it's difficult to do something more sophisticated. I can reanalyze for 2 disabilities, but currently that's my plan. 1 point adjustment across the board, chronically homeless clients with 3 or more disabilities to do that 3 point adjustment.
Real quick, does that mean 1 + 2 to equal 3 or 1 + 3 to equal 4?
You'll either get a 1 point adjustment or a 3 point adjustment as a Black or African American client. I think that I have been going back and forth on whether to do the adjustment for clients who also went through the VISPDAT exception process. I'm a little bit on the fence about that. I think my current instinct is yes. If we're gonna do it, just do it, even with the exception scores. There just aren't that many clients, and those clients tend to be pretty vulnerable anyways. But I'm open to thoughts on that. But that's my current plan on how to implement. And then there was another question about timeline. I'm trying to think, open to Ebony, who's the chair of that committee, also thinking, I'm thinking 3 months would be a good timeline for this. That would put us, let's see, right now we're mid-June. So that would put us in our July, August, we'd revisit in our September meeting. And hopefully by that time have, I really hope before then, but at minimum by September, we'll have a recommendation to bring back to you around a permanent solution to replacing the VISPDAT.
So, Hanley, I have an additional question. So there are COCs all over the country that have been doing this and are far beyond where we are right now in trying to address this issue. As I mentioned, I did send a message to you and to Colin, I think, and Lloyd. So the team inquiring about whether we could get some additional technical assistance to try to work on this issue that are beyond just 1 or 3 points. Do you think that that is something that in the next 3 months could happen? Do you think that community development is this something they're willing to work on, do? kind of just trying to figure out, or are we just gonna come up with our own solution on our own? If I find research, do you want me to forward some of that stuff to you? If I talk to some of my colleagues, because I sit on the National Clinicians Network advisory board for the National Council, do you want me to bring those things back to you in the next 3 months? Like, how do we go from the next 3 months to a more robust solution?
Yeah, so a couple things there. We are currently receiving technical assistance on this because Durham is currently participating in a HUD-run coordinated entry prioritization learning collaborative. So actually that is why I did this racial equity analysis. It was really them that encouraged us to do this. I was pretty convinced that we were already going to move away from the VI SPDAT, so I wouldn't have done this otherwise, but they really encouraged us to look at it. So we are getting that support, and that I think is going to be really important. Absolutely, anyone and everyone, if you find research or useful tools, send them my way. I'm currently conducting a literature review, looking at everything I can find specifically around adverse outcomes and predictors of those adverse outcomes, but also have asked our TAs to help us with any tools that already exist. I'm not sure we're going to do a tool. We don't want to just replicate the issues of the self-report that exists in the VI SPDAT. We're also looking at doing a crosswalk of institutional data and looking at what do we already know about people that we don't have to ask for self-reports on. So I don't know that it will be a tool, but certainly a strategy. But yes, absolutely. Anything anyone has that they think will be useful, please send my way. But I do believe that with the support of the Learning Collaborative, the survey that we're currently putting out to the community, and the research that I'm conducting, and hopefully as well some additional statistical analysis tools that I'm really hoping to get access to in that time frame so that I can run some more sophisticated analyses. I do hope that we will be equipped to make thoughtful and informed decisions on this in that time frame.
And that's great. And I would hope that whatever strategy that we use, that it doesn't require some self-report, but there's some other rubric that we do. As a person of color, anytime I hear anything about extra points or another bar that somebody who looks like me has to meet, it just makes me cringe. So like the points thing just bothered me all inside. I remember when I was, and this is going a little bit off the record, but it's relevant. I remember, I went to NC State. Not a lot of Black people go to NC State. And so, for my first year as a freshman and a sophomore, I always wondered whether I was just there to meet a quota. So, this very much so, this point system just really makes me feel, kind of takes me back to that and how that made me feel. And I don't want us to convey that message to our Black and brown homeless residents. So I think that whatever we do, it needs to be delicate touch and not so much burden on them, but maybe more diligence from us.
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. This is certainly not the ideal solution in any way, shape, or form. I did not want to come to y'all presenting the fact that there were such significant racial disparities without a potential recommendation. And this is what I could come up with as a potential short-term recommendation. I totally agree. This is not appropriate as a long-term solution. It's absolutely not something I would recommend to y'all. As something permanent. I only feel comfortable doing it knowing that it's a short term while we replace the VI SPDAT. I also think it's important to make the point that we're not putting in quotas here, right? We're not saying, well, first of all, that would be illegal, but we're not saying a certain percent are going to be Black. We're just, I think the way I'm trying to frame this is that it does appear that the VI SPDAT itself is doing this, right? It's adjusting these down. So I'm just trying to adjust them back up the way where they appear they should be. to get the VSBAT scores to be a little bit more accurate in comparison. And that's something we'll do on the back end. It's not something that is going to be done during the assessments, and it'll be on me to fix those once I get those scores in from the case managers. So the burden won't be on the clients, but completely agree with all of your points around the fact that this is a little bit awkward, and you know, there's a whole history around this issue that we need to be really thoughtful about, and agree that that's why we're talking about moving away from a self-report tool, because it seems likely that if we were to just come up with our own self-report tool, we would just be replicating these same issues that exist in the VSBAT already.
Everyone, this is I thank you, Hanalea, for your willingness to do this and have this discussion. I think it's very important that we make sure that we're serving all of our clients in the most humane and fair way. This is an item, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to vote on whether we will move forward with this temporary 3-month solution of this 1 to 3 points added for our persons of color who are in the system in order to impact the way we prioritize, well, you know what I'm trying to say, housing. So I will entertain a motion and a second and move forward with a vote at this time.
I motion that we adopt using an adjusted VSBAT scoring technique to allow for 1 to 3 points for Black or African American clients to be adjusted on their VSBAT scores until a permanent solution is found by the CE Coordinated Entry Subcommittee, with this recommendation to be reviewed at our September 2021 committee meeting.
I'll second
Have a
that.
motion. Who second?
Helen,
So it's moved by Malcolm, seconded by Helen. I would like to entertain you guys responding with your name, yes, no, or abstain at this time.
Can I amend the motion real quick?
Sure.
So all that I just said, right, until September of our 2021 meeting, or until a solution has been identified that would replace this scoring method as proposed by the Coordinated Entry Subcommittee in an earlier timeframe if possible.
So no later than
No later than September. Yeah.
No later than September. So we have an adjustment on the motion, as Malcolm just cited, and at this time, I will entertain your vote with a yes, no, abstain. Please speak your name as well.
Helen Tripp, yes.
Sharita McCullers, yes.
Lovette Williams, yes.
Colleen Herbert,
Malcolm
yes.
White. Me and Colleen just
Can't
step on each
vote.
other's toes.
Yes, can you, it's, Dr. White, are you a voting member of this committee? I can't remember because I didn't count you when I was counting how many members were present.
Me?
No, Dr. White. Yvette.
Oh, Lovette Williams, yes. Lovette is Janine's proxy, so she has no-
Gotcha.
Malcolm White, yes.
Heidi Carter, yes.
This is Jasmine Young Bradshaw with DCRC. I don't believe I have voting power, but maybe Hanalea, you can confirm that.
Actually, Ruby, would be the one to do that.
Oh,
Ruby, I don't think
sorry.
she's officially been appointed to this committee, has she?
No, not yet, not by HSAC yet.
So I have Helen Tripp, myself, Lovette, Malcolm White. Who is that?
You got Colleen.
Colleen Herbert. 1, 2, 3.
Commissioner Carter.
Valerie Carter. That's who that was I had right there. Colleen Herb. I miss you, Miss Colleen.
Sharita, this is Valerie, and I'm yes.
Did I miss anybody? I can't see all my, I have 11 participants here. Jasmine can't vote yet. Okay, motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness on this.
The next item on our agenda is the 300 and 500 block of Main Street. So for those who were in our most recent HSAC meeting, we had a presentation on housing around Durham, especially, well, most specifically affordable housing. And so the county presented their plans for the 300 and 500 blocks of Main Street, where they will be building some affordable housing units, specifically the ones that we're interested in, I know, are the 30% AMI units. Want to talk about that a little bit, I think, and we've gotten some suggestions from some folks that we go back to the county and ask of the county to prioritize some of those 30% AMI units for some of our folks. And so I want to discuss that today as a possible option. It is an item that we would support as the Policy and Planning Committee, and we will recommend to the full HSAC that we submit a request to the county for prioritization of some of those units. So we need to discuss whether yes or no, this is something we want to do, and then we need to come up with a reasonable percentage or number of those units that we would like the county to consider prioritizing our folks for. So I think it's good of time as any for us to talk about it. Let's see.
And Sharita, with the intention that we leave this meeting with that percentage recommendation to be given to the county?
Yes, well, we given to the HSAC so that the letter can be drafted to be presented to the county.
Okay.
So at this time, I will entertain some discussion around that, some questions, kind of your guys' thoughts about how we should approach this.
Can you remind us of how many units we're talking about?
Ruby,
Because we
can
said
you,
percentages.
Ruby, can
Sorry.
you give, okay, so Heidi said currently there are about 58 units set aside for the 30% AMI. Thank you, Commissioner Carter. So 58 units is the answer to your question, Ms. Colleen.
The 306 was my answer. Thank you.
Well, it's the total units, yes, it's 306. Is that correct? But that's not just 30% AMI. That's all of the groups, because I think it's 30, 60, and 80% AMI.
That's right, Sharita. Yeah.
So do we, go ahead, Commissioner Carter.
I was just going to say, you're exactly right. 58 units are the numbers that I've most recently seen for the current plans for those set aside for 30% AMI individuals that fall into that category, but also including affordable units for those at 60% of the AMI and 80% of the AMI. There's, over 306 units. And I would just say, I really like this idea that you're proposing, and definitely think it's an extremely worthy, proposition for the county to consider.
And I think it's important. I think it's important for us to ask, make this ask early so that we can build in how that will happen with them as well. So I think time is of the essence. We don't want them to get through with their project and then we have to go back and try to figure out how to do this thing. So I think that we need to, as a committee, come up with kind of what our thought is around this. Do we want to ask for the other AMIs, or do most of our people live in that 30% range? I know sometimes we have folks that life just happens and they may have a higher income, so we don't want to also not leave them out, as we talk about equity for our folks. So yeah, so 58, 30% AMI units, but they're also 60% and 80% to total up to 306 possible units.
Commissioner Carter, of that number, that 306, if I remember correctly from that presentation, that would include some residents who will be displaced by the demolition of current housing. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and I do not know those numbers, but you're absolutely right.
So we don't know the real number of how many units would be available. Like they don't have a projected number of how many folks they already have that would be slated potentially for a slot there.
Like new units, people who don't currently have a unit. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. I can look into that for you. For us, I can look into that.
I think that would be very helpful. I definitely understand other folks' need, but when we have such a shortage of, availability for our folks, it's also kind of challenging to choose who gets what. So.
Yeah, I bring that point up just in case that if there's a disproportionate number of those current residents who fall in the 30% category who may not be between 30 and 60 or 60 or 30 and 80. And if we're creating sort of an unintended bad consequence for those people too, is just sort of where I'm looking. I'm in favor of the idea, but I also want to bring up that, if we are pitting a population against another that equally needs housing who would be right at our door without it, we need to be careful of that.
And I think that's valuable, but so in my mind, do we set the bar low and say 10? I think we should, set a bar with consideration for, other folks, but it would be great to just have 10 opportunities. So it's 10 more than we have now. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I know I've been talking a lot. I apologize. I know in some of the other projects that I've seen, not through the county, but like through LIHTC development similarly, I feel like when this has been brought up, it's somewhere in the 5% to 10% range of kind of what's being asked for specifically for homeless clients. So 6 units would be 10% of the 30% AMI set asides. 10 would be something like what, 14%, something like that, or higher. So just kind of what might be a palatable place to start.
Thanks for that, Malcolm. It's crickets. I need some discussion, folks.
Well,
do you guys feel like it's go ahead. I
was gonna say, this is Colleen Herbert. I don't feel like I'm working with real numbers, and unless we know what we're actually looking at, it's hard for me to talk about it in terms, that's just my opinion. Because we don't know how many people are coming from out of being displaced versus what we're looking at.
Commissioner Carter, have you guys had any of this discussion about like projected real availability?
I mean, I feel like we're making a significant contribution to an increase in supply of affordable housing. Not simply replacing housing that is in disrepair and needs to be upgraded desperately, not just doing that, but also making it significant. I just don't know the exact numbers. And we have not had any discussion about the possibility of setting aside some of these houses for people who qualify by AMI and are experiencing homelessness. So I do think it's a good idea to get that on the commissioner's radar.
So would you think that us just making an ask and letting the county determine how many units that is a realistic solution instead of us picking that number?
Well, I liked Malcolm's idea of, however many new units there are, maybe select a percentage that you think is realistic, feasible, in line with best practices in other areas. If this is happening in other places that you're aware of where it's working well, that kind of thing. I think that's what commissioners would ask. They'd want more information around that sort of thing. Like, is this number in line with examples of this in other communities that are working well? And if not, if we're being a leader, that's good too, right? But recommendations from the providers and other stakeholders that are members of HSAC, I think that it would carry some weight with us.
Just when I think about it, it's a frustrating kind of place to be, because we've heard about, our city efforts, we've heard about other entities' efforts to increase our stock. And oftentimes the sad reality is that a lot of the units are already accounted for because, folks are either moving into those units because they're being displaced from somewhere else. And so it ends up really not being a true investment. A true investment, meaning adding more units, it just becomes replacing units for, other folks who are already housed to live in better places. And so, whereas I understand everybody's apprehension about not wanting to, displace other folks, we sit in this unique position where, yes, those folks are just important because we don't want to add to our homeless population. But I think that we have to be willing to extend ourselves and be just a little bit selfish sometimes, just to get a little further in our mission to end homelessness in Durham. Maybe a safe place is to look at the 6% or look at the average of, I think sometimes folks have asked for 2 and 5% of folks available housing stock. I think that, we sit in this very delicate place. I think not asking for this consideration would be detrimental to our clients.
So could we phrase our go ahead, Malcolm.
You sure, Colleen?
I was just going to say, could we not phrase our recommendation that we're recommending, what is it, somewhere 2 to 5 or whatever that number is, percent above the units that are set aside for displaced residents. So our ask is not to count the ones that are being displaced, but our ask is for a real set of units beyond that. So it'll be 2%, 5%, whatever that number is, above those that are displaced or outside of those that are displaced. That was it.
Ruby, do you know, is the gentleman who presented, is his PowerPoint up on durhamcuc.org? Because I do recall that he touched on it. I just don't remember the number. So we may be able to pull out of that presentation what the number of new units it would result in is one question that I had. Oh, great. Look at that. And then as Ruby's looking for that, I had 2 other points. One is that you can advocate for, and I don't know all of the ways to do this, I've just sort of seen it happen before. You can advocate for accommodations in the process of the application as well too, to better support people experiencing homelessness as one avenue that could be there. And then my last point was, if we feel like we're making a request that we want to negotiate on or give ourselves some room to negotiate, you could advocate for 12, which would be 20% of the 30% of the total unit of the 30% AMI set-asides, but only about, what is that, like 4% of the total number of units? So it could
Right.
be, you could advocate for that and then see, and if you're willing to come down to 6 in your head, something like that, or 9 or whatever the number is.
Or we could say up to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I mean, I think not asking would be just bad for us, bad for our folks. So I mean, I think no matter what we do, just the fact that there are new affordable housing units available anywhere in Durham, they're going to get a multitude of applications, whether people are displaced or not, you know, because folks are just going to want to be in a newer, better place than where they are.
How about, is the same sort of request being made of any of the partnerships that the city has where they're developing more affordable housing? Isn't there one about to open near the old police station, for example?
You're talking about Willard Street?
Yes.
Honolulu did. I know that I heard about, you know, the Willard Street units. I don't know if that sort of request was made when it was decided that those were going to be developed. I don't even know if we had a policy and planning subcommittee when that happened.
No, that project is, you know, is the result of a number of years of work.
Right.
Actually predates me even. Currently, the city, my department has a bonus in place for scoring in an RFP. We are in the process of discussions with the multifamily housing development about how we can further that work. I certainly think a similar request could be appropriate. I think the issue is where in that process for the city do you make that request, right? Because the city is putting out these major RFPs for multiple dollars. So it's a little different than what the county is doing with specific sites. But yeah, so I think a similar request could be appropriate. But I would recommend that request be more general. Like we are requesting that in future developments, this % be set aside or something like that, because we're gonna have so many developments coming through from the city. But no, a request like that has not been made.
And if I understand correctly, they have quite a wait list already. So I don't know like where we would get in that process at this point.
For Willard, it would not be possible. Willard is already, you know, moving people in, and it's past that point for Willard.
They are accepting applications though. The DHA website, I think, has them listed as a place you can apply for, but I have no clue how long that wait list is for people applying now.
Yeah, I think the key with Willard is to implement the DHA priority that we have an agreement with them on. We have finally executed an MOU with DHA for the implementation of their 5% priority that they approved several years ago in their admin plan. So that's significant progress for us. We are in the process of trying to figure out the timeline for implementing it, but we are making progress on that front. So I think for Willard in particular, that's probably the big step, is getting that priority implemented. But I think really for the city, it's future developments. You can't really make a request of someone who already has a contract with the city. I think that's not going to be feasible.
So what are you guys' thoughts? Because we are fast approaching the end of our meeting.
I think action is important, even if we don't necessarily know what the best course of that is to start and take a shot at it, and then maybe we refine that, right? I'm sitting over here a little bit like disappointed in myself that I hadn't put some thought into this process. In, we get webinars left and right about affirmatively furthering fair housing, or affirmatively affording fair housing and affordable housing, and I just for some reason sort of didn't consider this. And so I do think that it's important for us to have whatever limited voice we have to use it in this moment.
I also think that we can finesse if we make a vote to move forward with making a request, that we have time to finesse exactly what our ask is in our recommendation to HSAC prior to our meeting. Do you agree, Hanalea?
I keep turning my camera off. Yes, I do agree with that. And I think that you could also do a conditional vote, right? So you could say, if X, then we're going to recommend this amount. And if Y, then we'll recommend that amount. That's another way you could go. And then we can find out the answers to those questions and verify them for you before the meeting. But yes, I agree. This is not a policy decision, so I think you do have a little bit more flexibility.
It's just us lending our voice to what we have available in our community to further our mission of ending homelessness in Durham County, making it, one time brief as possible, and never happening again. I will entertain a motion if folks are ready to move forward on this matter, and we will finesse the request in the coming weeks. Commissioner Carter, do you think that you could ask these questions and get us some answers prior to our next HSAC meeting, so to help us in finessing the request that we will recommend to the full HSAC?
Sure, I will do my best. You would like, what we need to know that we don't know, right, is the number of new units that will be available.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I can ask about that. I was also just sitting here thinking probably Hanalea has contacts and could find that out as well, but I don't know for sure. Is that right, Hanalea? I mean, is the city community development department working with DHA and anyone in the county on this? This is the first. This is the first the time the county's ever built housing ever that I know of. And so we're doing a lot, I think, in partnership with the city. So I didn't know whether you were connected.
Colin's been working with Drew on this. So I'll be honest in that I need to be really clear on what the questions were. But yes, but I think probably staff could find out the answers.
Well, I will call Drew today and, start my own exploration of this question.
Yeah, just let me know what support you need from me.
I will. I'll start on my own today.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Sure. Thank you all for raising this.
So I will go back to you guys, and I will say, because it's very quiet right now, and I understand the situation is important and a delicate circumstance. Do we feel comfortable with making some type of request for units?
Yeah, I mean, that's another way you could go with this vote. You could say, you could vote at this point that you want to make a recommendation for a request to units to the county, and that the amount of those units that you're going to defer to staff on that recommendation, and we can figure out what we think is appropriate. That's another way you could go. Just trying to think of things that you could do at this point. We could also do a email vote if that would be the preference once we have this information.
I don't know why you wouldn't get this on the plate of the commissioners. We should be thinking about this, and we haven't. And so I absolutely think you should bring the idea forward. I like what Hanalea suggested, that this group recommends to HSAC to recommend to us that we set aside some units for those experiencing homelessness, and then perhaps leave it to the administration, just to our staff to determine the most appropriate number at, later point in time. But to me, this feels kind of like a policy discussion that the commissioners and city council members in the future should be having anytime we build affordable housing.
I motion that we submit a request to HSAC for a number of prioritized units for people experiencing people experiencing homelessness from the number of total units of affordable housing at 300 East Main Street and 500 East Main Street. The number of units subject to staff recommendations from the city of Durham and Durham County.
I have a motion. Can I get a second?
A second.
And then, of course, I need you guys' responses. Yes, no, abstain.
Heidi Carter, yes.
Ellen Tripp, yes.
Sharita McCullers, yes.
Ebony Thomas, yes.
Malcolm White and Colleen Herbert, yes, that she filed the motion, right?
Yes.
I'm missing somebody.
Valerie said yes in the chat.
Gotcha. Motion carries. Okay, we have 6 minutes and 2 items. I think I can go through the first one really quickly. So the first one relates to the home funds discussion that we had in our executive committee meeting. I can't remember if we mentioned this in last month's meeting. So there is going to be some home funds that are going to be made available as a response, I think, to some of the COVID funding that's come out. And we have decided that the committee will be invited to take part in a larger group discussion about needs and wants for our homeless community. We're not going to spend time today talking about that. We think that it is a good idea with the amount of money. I think it's somewhere around $4 million. Is it, Hanalea? Is that the right number, Hanalea?
I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
I want to say that Colin said somewhere around there, and clearly it's not enough potentially for every idea that we could have. But it's a conversation that we feel like we need a community response to about needs for the funds and how we will utilize them. So the committee will be invited at a later time to start those community conversations about how to use the home funds. And then the last item here, it says if there's time, I got 4 minutes, is about shared housing as a possible decision. So I think Lloyd has a presentation coming up from a lady about the shared housing process. Were we supposed to make a recommendation, Hanalea?
I'm not.
He has it on, he has it, we talked about it. I think it was like a commitment for shared housing that Lloyd was saying that the lady who's gonna do that presentation, she wanted like a commitment that was something we were gonna do.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I know the conversation. I was not part of the conversation about what would be brought to this committee.
Well,
so
he said we could, if we had time to talk about a decision, if there was time that we needed to talk about it, revisit it. I don't know if this is in preparation for the lady coming, because I think she wanted some commitments from us when she was coming, and determine, how we felt about it. Is this something we actually realistically are ready to move forward on and do? I don't know if it was an effort to not waste the lady's time. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we don't have enough time to really talk about it, and it doesn't sound like we have to make a decision today.
Yeah, I would recommend that is something that we bring back when Lloyd is present and can really explain
So we'll
it.
bring that back in our, this is June. Are we having a July meeting? I think we talked about the possibility of a July meeting for policy and planning, right?
I think we're hoping maybe not to have one, but that was the conversation in the context of the funding with CDBG. But at the moment, I don't know that we have that planned. I think there was also supposed to be a gaps analysis update on the agenda, but it seems like maybe we're out of time and we have to.
We are out of time, but he didn't say anything to me about gaps analysis update.
Oh, yeah, I think
Okay.
Sharita, we had talked about it in the last meeting. So I don't know that Colin knew, but I had thought you were going to put an agenda. Totally understandable.
Well, both times that I talked to Colin, I was not sitting at my desk where my notes are, so it got missed. Is it something that we can talk about? I mean, we clearly don't have time, but is it something in urgency that we need to discuss around the gaps analysis today?
Can we just put something like for the record and then have further discussion, which is basically we wanted to put forth the idea of there being money set aside for a person or position to support our work on the gaps analysis. So, and I can't remember where the funds were coming from, but that was what we wanted to do, was to make sure that was something that was considered.
And were we also talking about the decision that maybe the gaps analysis wouldn't be ready?
Right, and to extend the date.
The timeline. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit late to push this all the way to August. We could decide to have a meeting into July to discuss that and any other meetings. I don't know how the group feels about that. Otherwise, we could maybe try to provide an update via email. I don't know, but I do think this probably needs to be discussed before August.
So is there anyone opposed to potentially a July meeting? This would put us on for July, the second Monday?
It's July 12th.
Mm-hmm.
We also, for the record, the session about shared housing was supposed to be on Friday and has been postponed to July to honor the city's commitment to recognize. Right. So that session is on July 16th, which would be that week of our policy and planning meeting. I'm fine with the July meeting.
Anybody opposed to it? I'm fine with it too.
And then one other thing, sorry for the record, was that the request about the funds for the gaps analysis were a request of community development for the funds for the staffing.
Is that something that the policy and planning committee has to vote on, Hanalea, that ask, or can we just make that request right now in the meeting and it get taken back to CD staff, to your colleagues?
I mean, I think you could do that, but my recommendation is a more thorough discussion about what the gaps analysis experience has been, and an actual vote to make a recommendation. Yeah, that would be my recommendation.
So I would say that so can we just go ahead and just say that special meeting on July 12th will be to discuss these two issues, the gaps analysis and shared housing?
Yeah, and then I think also if CDBG needs to be discussed, you could discuss it in that meeting. I don't know whether it will be ready per Colin, but.
We may get something back about the set-asides for the county project too, so I'm sure we'll have stuff.
And then you talking about 300, 500 block?
Yeah.
Request, okay. But Hanalea and Commissioner Carter will try to get us some information. I think she's already gone to another meeting.
Yeah, I think the hope is to take that to HSAC this month, so that should be dealt with before.
Right, so we need to be dealing with that just via email. Folks will get an email with just the answers to the questions that we had today. Hanalea, we can chat about it, or if I need to send like a formal request in writing just to whoever, like the commissioners, and we can do that. And we can go ahead and get the ball rolling, and then we can just send everybody the responses that we get, and so we can fine tune our requests.
I just need clarity on what the questions are to be fully transparent. I had started working on implementing the racial equity stuff that is going to take me some time to work on, so I wasn't fully listening. So I just need some clarity on what the questions are, and then I'm happy to work on it.
So you guys want to give her those questions really quickly? We're about 2 minutes over. I think we can take 3 minutes and do that if you guys are not opposed.
The number of total units available once people who are exiting from housing that might be displaced in the creation of this project are accounted for. was question number 1. What was question number 2? Has there been a conversation, I think, at the county level, like in sort of in Drew's network, about there being any of this already considered?
I'm sorry, I don't fully understand that question. What is the question exactly with that?
Like, has there been a conversation around prioritization of people experiencing homelessness for those for the 30% AMI? Has that already happened at the county level at all? Like, maybe they've already thought of it.
I think I can answer that question. The answer to that question is that how should I phrase this? County staff believes this is a good idea. It has not been taken to the county commissioners because they believe that the recommendation should come from HSAC.
Okay.
I
I remember
there-
there was another question.
So I think the main question is, after they account for the folks that are being displaced or guaranteed a unit, how many units are available, potentially, real vacant units?
I can definitely get an answer to that.
Considered. Yes, that could be considered. Yeah.
And
And then once we get those numbers back, we will make some percentage requests, right?
the potentially difficult tag on I would add is that if they know the breakdown of what that would be, like, I don't know if they have that information from the households yet, but if they know that that's disproportionately in the 30% population, to take that into account too.
So what happens if they don't have any units then? We have a lot of people at that 30% AMI. I mean, I think if we ask for a consideration, it doesn't mean it's a one time, it means it's ongoing. Is that correct, Hanalea?
Yes, it should be in the permanent affordability period. We'll be monitoring.
So
on
if
that.
there is some opening, there will be some way that we get notified that there is a vacancy and availability for us to get one of our persons in. So I think this is not just saying, give us some right now when you build it. We're saying build into your rubric room to prioritize our folks.
Yeah,
right?
and I think that should be part of the request to the county is that availability of units will be communicated directly to the COC.
It would be in their tenant selection plan. Like, it would have to be language that's written in their tenant selection plan.
So guys, because I know some people had some comfort issues with, pushing other people out. We're talking about an ongoing process that takes into account our folks' need for housing as well. So this is just not like right now, but in the future as well. So you will start to get some email conversations from us with some answers to these questions and any other questions that maybe the county has for us. And we will try to have our request ready to present to HSAC for our June meeting. And then if you guys want to update in our July 12th meeting, we will give an update at that time. So, Hanalea, you feel comfortable?
Yes, I have clarity on the question and I will get an answer to it. That should not be a problem.
Thank you very much. We have
to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Yeah.
Ebony seconded the motion to adjourn.
Sorry, it's the first day of summer school and
It's okay. It was great to see you guys. It was great for us to have the conversations and make some decisions today. I'm excited. We will end our meeting and I will see you guys on the 12th. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.